Dear friends, dear viewers of Baku Network platform, welcome to our new edition. As always, we are joining from the Parliament of Azerbaijan together with my colleague, Ms. Sevil Mikailova. And also we have very important, very special guest today joining us from Netherlands, from Hague, the city of Hague, Mr. Сэндью Хира. He is a very famous and very famous publisher, and now I have his book, which is called Decolonizing the Mind, a guide to decolonial theory and practice. So Mr. Сэндью Хира, it's very nice to meet you here in our platform in the Baku Network. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to join us from Netherlands. Mr. Hira, Ms. Sevil Mikailova, as you know, recently Azerbaijan has become one of those important countries which play a very important role fighting Islamophobia, neocolonialist trends in globe. Just recently we had a very important international conference in Azerbaijan dedicated to the theme of fighting neocolonialism, Islamophobia. And Mr. Сэндью Хира, you also participated in this conference. So I would like to start with you, Mr. Сэндью Хира. You have written a very important book entitled Decolonizing the Mind. Frankly speaking, until I have seen your book, I was thinking that neocolonialist policy, decolonization process must continue and we must fight against neocolonialist policies. But I have never thought about decolonizing the mind, because it's very important that we start from here, from our mind. Unfortunately, some European politicians, European Parliament, according to our experience, according to our knowledge, they unfortunately missed the opportunity to start with the decolonizing their mind towards those people, towards those nations whom they behaved as neocolonialist countries, neocolonialist powers. But I think that this is a very important aspect to start with. I would like to hear about your thoughts, Mr. Сэндью Хира, please.
Thank you very much. Normally when people talk about colonialism, they think about the political and economic aspect of it. And decolonization is political independence from the former colonizer. That is how people often think about it. But for the past few decades, intellectuals from the global south has pointed to another dimension of colonialism, which is knowledge production and the cultural dimension of colonialism. Now, in the theoretical framework of decolonizing the mind that I have developed, I argue that we should look at world history in terms of civilization, while in the liberal view of the European Enlightenment, they see the world history in terms of developing from barbarism to modernity. And modernity is liberal capitalist system. In a Marxist view, they also see it from let's say communal society to communism, but they take class as a basis of analysis. The liberalism take individual as a basis of analysis, but DTM, decolonizing the mind, takes civilization as the basis of analysis. And the basis of a civilization is knowledge production, because the knowledge production tells you how you set up your economic, political, social, cultural system of a society. The Islamic civilization goes back to the Quran and the Hadith, and they have done the knowledge base of it tells you how to set up your society, your economic, political system. So what happens with the European civilization is that it became global. So Islamic civilization was not stretched to, let's say, Australia or Latin America, which people call Abiyala, but colonialism was global. And the knowledge of colonialism was the European Enlightenment. And my argument now is that we are, and it is a very young civilization, only 500 years old, and the European Enlightenment is only 350 years old. And we are now currently at the end phase of this colonial world civilizations, with major breaking points where we face now, which is the war in Ukraine, the genocide in Palestine, the threat of war in Taiwan, in China, and that we are in a very changing world. And we see the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as new institutions that come up. Now, what will the new civilization look like? And I think that is where all countries of the world and the intellectuals of the world should think about. What is our basis of a new world civilization? Take, for example, economic theory. If you are at university anywhere in the globe, you are being taught about Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and the classical European economic theories, obviously also Marxism. But there is an extensive Islamic economic theory. There's an extensive Buddhist economic theory. So what about the economic theory of other civilizations? And if we build a new civilization, we have to look into all the knowledge that came out of the global south. So my argument is that we need to build a new network of intellectual thinking that goes beyond Eurocentrism. And that is not an easy task because we have difference of opinions, but difference of opinion is a breeding ground for creativity. You know, if everybody thinks the same, there's no creativity anymore. So what I like about the Islamophobia conference is that it brought people from different parts of the world, very different views, to think about the nature of Islamophobia. And one of the things we have to think about now is, where are we in world history? And where are we going with world history? How does the world look like in 50 years? I give the example in the book. 50 years ago, we're now 2024, right? 50 years ago, let's say around 1970, we didn't have internet. A large part of the world was just freed from colonialism. China was nowhere as an economic power. 50 years later, the world has changed dramatically. Now, 50 years from now, how will the world look like? That depends on how we view world history and how we are going to intervene in it. And that's why I like this idea of you setting up this think tank network that needs to think about 50 years from now, not tomorrow, not next year. And then the question is, how do you position yourself as a country, in this case Azerbaijan, in world history? Because we are going through grave changes in time. You know, in my view, for example, in maybe in 10 years' time, we don't know if Israel will exist. We don't know what the situation in Ukraine and Taiwan will be. But my guess is that systems of injustice, which colonialism was, system of injustice like colonialism will not have a reason to exist, just like slavery in the United States. It existed for 100 years, but at the end of the day, it couldn't last. And my thing, all system of injustice will sooner or later give away to new systems that are more attached to justice. But in order to do that, you have to look into how knowledge was colonized. And the colonization of the knowledge, the colonization of the mind, how does economic, political, social, economic theories, even mathematics, I have a chapter on the book on decolonizing mathematics, and people think you can't do that. But I think knowledge has been thoroughly colonized, and we need to decolonize knowledge. That is the challenge of the new intellectuals for the future.
Yes, Mr. Сэндью Хира, this is indeed a very important book, because in this book you argue to look at to the others from the perspective of looking at the theories to economy to political decision making, not only the Western global north, but also the civilization of others, how they think, how they approach the situation in their own region. And like you have said, where we have to think about where do we see ourselves from 50 years from now. I can tell you, maybe Sevil Khanım, you can also comment on this, because as Azerbaijan is becoming one of those countries who is leading the global fight against Islamophobia, also leading the politics against fighting against xenophobia, and Azerbaijan is becoming a center country which accumulates all these powers circles who are willing to say no to colonialism, who are willing to start decolonizing their minds. And as we speak today, in Baku, we have another important event that is being held, the Baku Global Forum, and very interesting also title Baku Global Forum has, how we can bring together, restore the world that unfortunately that is being drawn and separated from each other, because unfortunately the lines of division are being drawn right now, even in the South Caucasus. But what we are aiming at by organizing such kind of international conferences, Baku Global Forum, we are sending message to different parts of the world that we are not with those who would like to divide the globe, divide the regions. Against of this, we have our own approach, which is bringing together different civilizations. Dialogue is very important. But also, yes, Sevil Khan, maybe you will start commenting on the importance of the Baku Global Forum, because Mr. President also mentioned very important topics. He highlighted how, unfortunately, France is acting against Azerbaijan, even insulting our cultural heritage. The bust of the Khurshid Banu Natavan, you know, was vandalized in France. So what's your thoughts about this Baku International Baku Global Forum and how it can affect the overall understanding of the situation in our region?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, I want to welcome our guests from the Netherlands. And Mr. Nira, you have done a great job. I want to congratulate you because this is really a very interesting and very important book, because its theory is important for the troubled world now. And what actually impedes us to go further and to build up our world in the right direction, this is colonialization of our minds. I agree with you, because sometimes we are too far from reality. In some cases, we want the reality to be in the form that we wish to see it. But where is the natural growth and where is the natural development? We need to think about it. You just mentioned about the 50 years ahead. Yes, we may think about the 50 years ahead, but to think about the period and the developments which will happen 50 years after, we need to evaluate what is going on in our world today. Therefore, I think Baku Global Forum that kicked off today in Baku is very important, because in this war-torn world, in this troubled world, we really need to look inside the world, what is happening and what actually impedes us to build up our world and to plan our future, to see our future and to focus our future. So, Mr. President, today I had a very inside report, appeal to the participants of the conference, and the milestones that he mentioned in his speech. I think it is worth to discuss here in our discussion as well, because what is actually impeding, and one of these is lack of diversity in minds. It actually gives birth to Islamophobia. It gives birth to xenophobia. It gives birth to other very, very dangerous trends and tendencies, which actually ultimately leads to what we see now in different geographies, and what actually doesn't allow us to look forward our future, and think about our future. And coming back to the topic of Islamophobia, I would like to accent on this topic. Why? Because, you know, this is a clash of civilizations, unfortunately. And this is the theory which we heard even 200 years ago, 300 years ago, but it continues, and despite the world has entered in a modern period, we are again and again speaking about this item. And for example, France, which is supposed to be the center of the cultural evolution, which is supposed to be the center of cultural diversity, now actually is in the center of policy, which pursues Islamophobia, Turkophobia, and other very, very dangerous trends. And we see it in Africa, we see it in South Africa, we see it even in Europe, and France unfortunately leads in this trend. Only one fact: a while ago, monument to the Azerbaijani poetess. She is a woman, she's a female poet, and she belongs not only to Azerbaijani culture, maybe to the Oriental culture. She was a Khan, she was governor, she was a daughter of Khan. And what has happened today? So yes, it is good that her statue was put in Evian city in France, but now we see acts of barbarism against this lady. Why, we ask, why? If we are fighting for equality, if we want women's rights to be, you know, equal, gender rights to be equal throughout the world, if we are for the all morality worldwide, why in France, which, you know, always presents itself as the cradle of culture, a cradle of diversity, now acts as a barber against this statue. So we, of course, rescued her monument, and it was immediately taken and sent to Paris just to be preserved in the culture center of Azerbaijan. But isn't it shameful for the society as well? Isn't it shameful for the France's political establishment as well? Where do we go? This is the very question that we need to ask in this very point. And again, back to Islamophobia. Unfortunately, it is not in France. In other places of the world, we see how tragic ends the process gains. We need to respect the civilizations. We need to respect the beliefs of people. We need to respect their traditions coming from centuries based on their national peculiarities. And once we were unable to accept people as they are and as they exist, we will not be able to make a progress in any of the sphere, believe me. You just mentioned about the economic views. Yes, maybe economic interests can be one of the directions which can bring us together. Just you know, forgetting about the political interests, forgetting about the phobias that we actually invented, so to quote, but to think our interests in economy, how we can lead the world to prosperity. And I think this is very important.
Yes, Sevil Khan, you have highlighted very important aspects, especially decolonizing the mind. That's, as Mr. Сэндью Хира is arguing, is very important also. But here, Mr. Сэндью Хира, you have chapter 11 in your book, which is entitled Decolonizing Cultural Theory. You know, as Sevil Mikailova mentioned, unfortunately we are seeing some trends in Europe, like in France, that, as Sevil Khan mentioned, introducing itself as a cradle of culture to the world, but on the other hand, insulting the cultural heritage of other nations, of other people. So here I would like to ask you, Mr. Сэндью Хира, what is your ideas of decolonizing cultural theory, because even from this perspective we see how the neocolonial powers also consider themselves supreme compared to other nations, compared to other nations' culture. Even very famous French philosopher René Guénon, in his very famous book, The Crisis of Modern World, he touches upon the crisis of the cultural heritage of the modern world, how people understand how differently, I mean, people in the West, in Europe, understand their cultural supremacy, and exploiting and insulting another people's culture is based on their understanding, on their attitude towards others. So what is decolonizing cultural theory, how you perceive it, and how we can implement and carry out this theory into the practice, that we can stop and we can never see such a vandalist kind of steps taken in Europe, in France.
Okay, thank you very much. So in my view, let's say the desecration of the statue of this female hero in France is not an incident. It's an incident in the sense that event took place, but it is embedded in the culture of the European Enlightenment, where the concept of superiority, inferiority was embedded in knowledge. For example, I gave her my book in chapter 6 on the history of racism. I give quotes from the major philosophers of the European Enlightenment: David Hume, George Hegel, Immanuel Kant, Voltaire, and they all, if you read their quotes, they are very, they regard non-Europeans, and especially Africans who were enslaved, as cattle, as animals. And later on, with the abolition of slavery and colonization of the rest of the world beyond Africa and Latin America, Abiyala, beyond that, they colonized Asia and Western Asia, and then the rise of the social science made a distinction between superior cultures, which is Western culture, and they are superior. Why? Because they have science. They think that science was only in Europe, and that other civilizations didn't have science, and they didn't think with the rational, with the mind. So racism, Islamophobia, is a form of racism. It's not a completely new thing. It's a form of racism where Islamic culture is seen as inferior, backward. And then if you look at it as such, then you are allowed to attack it and to desecrate its cultural heritage. So how do we move now from this to another kind of world? When I talk about thinking in long terms, I don't mean thinking how the world will look like in 50 years. I mean thinking about the process that leads to it. So you think about now, not what is it that is going on now that will change the world in 50 years. Let me take China, for example. When Deng Xiaoping initiated the reform, before he initiated the reform, he had a lot of discussion on emancipating the mind. That is what he mentioned. If you read Deng Xiaoping, and he says, we were trained as Marxists, and we didn't think that market could be an instrument in building up an economy. We didn't look at it. Now we want to build an economy based with socialism based on Chinese characteristics. We introduce market, and we don't see it as a negative thing, which is in the mind of Marxists a big turnover. You see, but once he did that, it was clear that China might become number one in the world economy, which is now. So we have to think, what kind of process are we now in that will lead to another world? Take, for example, if you were in let's say 1914 in Europe, you had the Ottoman Empire, you had the Russian Empire, you had the Habsburg Empire. 4 years later, they were gone. How is that possible? There was a process leading towards it. Now, I was in Venezuela giving a course on decolonizing the mind, and I use this example. If you were living in 1615 in Mexico, then you would know the name of the King of Spain, the name of the ministers, because Spain was an imperial power. If I tell you now, in 50 years' time, you might not know the name of the American president, because the American president is a president of a country like Spain now. 50 years later, its imperial power is gone, but your mind is so accustomed to accepting that the American empire will last forever that you can't imagine that you don't know the name of the president. But that process is going on now. There is a delegitimization of European power all over the world. And then the question is, how will the power of other nations come? Now, Azerbaijan is taking the lead in Islamophobia. I was there at the conference and I've been at other conferences, bringing 130 people from different parts of the world, from 30 countries or so. It's a major thing to get them there. It's not it costs a lot of money, it costs a lot of organization, it costs a lot of fishing to do that. Now, Azerbaijan has to think about, like any other country, how do you position yourself in the new world history that is developing? And then obviously how do you position yourself in the main crises that are developing, which is Eastern Europe, Western Asia, Palestine, Taiwan, North Korea, Latin America. These are the major challenges, and we have to think about what does it mean, this changing world, for policies and so. And I think decolonizing mind helps you think outside the box of Western theories, that there are other thinking possible.
Yes, very interesting, because especially decolonizing the mind and taking into account this perception that especially neocolonialist powers in Europe see and accepts the situation from the point of view that we are supreme, and that's why developing this idea of neocolonialist agenda against those powers, against those third countries, developing countries, is understandable. Selham, I would like to maybe to wrap up with your ideas. This perception of being supreme compared to others also leads us to a situation like European Parliament, European politicians are not accepting the reality, for example, adopting very biased, unjustified resolutions against Azerbaijan just a few days ago, yes. And yesterday we have seen a number of resolutions against Azerbaijan. And also, for example, very interesting that the Mr. Сэндью Hira, who is coming from Netherlands, from Hague, the very most important politician in Netherlands, Geert Wilders, in his public statements, adding more and more Turkophobic, Islamophobic ideas in order to win his electorate. So in this very troubled situation, do you think that Azerbaijan, together with Turkic world, together with its allies, can fight, can stay its position against these powers who are coming, who are acting against Azerbaijan with all their power? Do we have any kind of own resources to fight against this phenomenon?
Thank you very much for this question. It's very important, and I think it might take us even hours to discuss and to find the answer, but I will try to be short. Yes, there are countries who think, yes, they are superior, and who think that they need to dictate everyone, and they can teach everyone how to, behave in international relations. But, this policy actually leads to isolation of Europe as well. You mentioned just the European Parliament. That's why I'm, in answer to your
yes.
thesis, I say that this leads to isolation. you know, Azerbaijan was very active in the European structures since the very beginning, and the European way of development and the European values was the conscious choice of Azerbaijan since 1991 when we restored our independence. But unfortunately, for over 30 years, the policy that was pursued in Europe and other international organizations like the European Union, the Council of Europe, Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, OSCE and other organizations actually led us to an idea that you have no place in this organization. This is just a tool to dictate and to show the way for you how to behave. Yes. But we, as Azerbaijan, as a new independent country, new democracy, we need more independence. We have found our way of development, and now for our region, the values that you want, to send us from that geography sometimes is not acceptable. Sometimes we believe that they have a very, very, sour policy, interests, and we cannot accept it. And therefore, not only Azerbaijan, we have just explained it in the example of Azerbaijan. I think other countries now are thinking about it as well. So how to find themselves in this wide system of international relations, how to act, how to find their own centers and how to form their own centers. Therefore, I think the organization of Turkic states is the very real and timely answer to all these threats. Yes. We feel the threats to our independence, we feel threats to our independent policy and our security ultimately. And therefore, I think the organization of Turkic states can form a new force in our geography. We can become economically strong because we have resources. We can become politically united and be able to answer and to respond all these threats and all these outcoming attacks on us.
Yes, exactly. Very good point, especially the organization of Turkic states, which is a new emerging kind of power in our region and hopefully in the globe. So thank you very much, dear Ms. Sevil Mikailova, Mr. Hira, for this interesting discussion. I do think that we can continue our debates in series, very important topics to discuss, especially taking into account that now we are entering into a phase of a new activism, fighting against Islamophobia, fighting against neocolonialist policies of some Western countries, European countries, and to stop this dangerous trend in our region. Thank you very much for joining our conversation.
Thank you.
Much. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward for further conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.